All right. Well, hello to all. Happy Star Wars Day to you. I don't know how you are feeling, but my school's APUSH test is Thursday. Fear not. Take a deep breath because we have the calming clarity of content that will help you to focus today. And as always, your guide through that journey of preparation is Tom Richey. Tonight is number 8 in our 9-part series by the Bill of Rights Institute to focus on key content in preparation for your APUSH exam. Remember that you can view all the videos in this series on the Bill of Rights YouTube channel. Read the video description, follow the content, and forward it to where you want to review to help you the most. Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe to Bill of Rights channel here for great content on history and government. Hit the notification bell like I do to be notified of all the great new content. Also, join BRI students on Instagram. All that social media information is in the video notes tonight. So tonight we're going to focus on the causes of the Great Depression, FDR's New Deal, American neutrality in the 1930s, and on World War II, both at home and abroad. My name is Sean Redman. I am a high school U.S. history and civics teacher at Bolsa Grande High School in Garden Grove, California. As always, I am so happy and proud to represent an organization that I absolutely love and rely on for content myself. That is the Bill of Rights Institute. I will be monitoring the chat and gathering important questions to present to our content expert, the aforementioned Tom Richey. I mentioned our hosts tonight already now a couple times, but I don't get tired of telling you again that in AP strategy, Tom Richey is a teacher of teachers. He is an expert's expert, and no doubt he is the pride of the Palmetto State. Tom is a Louisiana native. He teaches history and government classes in South Carolina. He has been teaching AP U.S. history since 2008, and since 2012, he has published AP U.S. history-related content on his YouTube channel and website. Put your questions in the chat. I will give Tom as many as possible. Also, we have a bunch of links in the video notes for you to explore, so check them out, including also Tom's Google Doc with information that he's going to drop in there tonight, just like that. Those links are just a small sample of what the Bill of Rights Institute has to offer on their website, so check it all out. But right now, Tom, lead us in our way for all these weary travelers. Take it away, Tom.
All right, Sean, thank you very much. And may the force be with you, sir. I tell you, this guy, always gives me a great introduction. And it's hard to believe that we're already, this is such a marathon here that we're in the middle of this, almost finished with this 9-webinar series that we do over, less than 2 weeks, really. I mean, this is, we do a lot of cramming here, and the APUSH exam is going to be in just a couple of days. So we're going to be focusing on the Great Depression and World War II. Now, as always, we always want to remind y'all that the chat, we got a lot of people saying, hey, in the chat and that sort of thing. So with that, just make sure that, we're going to just let me know where you want this to go, because there are directions I'll take it on my own. But if we've got some people that want to go in a different direction, then let me know. So with that, and we've got about 93 watching, but only about 15 likes on the video. So if you're finding this at any point, you're finding this helpful, go ahead and give the video an additional like, so that's going to be really helpful to getting this visible. Okay, because if you find this helpful, there are probably some other APUSH students on YouTube that need to see this as well. So with that, let's go ahead and start off. Now, I've got this, as Sean said, there is a link to the Google document that's got a lot of resources and also some things that I'm going to be linking. And one of the things that's linked in that Google Doc that you can get from the in the description is my, basically some notes that I've made on the Great Depression and causation. Okay, so I think one of the most important things, and also when you're looking at causation, let's talk about kind of how we, we might look into that and how to, basically how to do a DVQ that's focused on causation. Okay, because sometimes we see this, and so let me go ahead and find something I'm looking for here. Okay, so this is a DVQ that I'm gonna flash it here on the screen, and just to take a look at the prompt here. Okay, because this when it comes to something like this, it's going to help out if you've got some background here. So, for example, here's a DVQ that I wrote actually fairly recently. Evaluate the relative importance of different causes of the Great Depression in the period from 1919 to 1933. Okay, so with that, this is a prompt format that was used in 2018. It was about, about imperialism at the turn of the century. This is what we were talking about during yesterday's review. And so evaluate the relative importance. Now, the thing is, if you're going all the way for complex understanding, you're going to be thinking of different causes and not only thinking about like 2 or 3 causes, but also being able to rank them. Okay, so ideally, you are going to be able to rank the causes and say that this is the most important, this is the next most important. So as far as this goes, let's go ahead and see in the chat. Let's get a little chat participation here. And what I want y'all to do is y'all go ahead and tell me, what do you think was the most important cause of the Great Depression? Now, remember that these are argumentative questions. No matter what question is being put out there, they're argumentative questions, but the people who are writing the DVQ, they have some answers in mind. Okay, so when it comes down to it, when I designed this DVQ, when I picked out the documents, I was thinking specifically like each document is kind of made to stimulate, kind of like a stimulus-based multiple choice question. It's to stimulate your thinking. You're like, oh, this goes to this cause or that cause, you see? So let me go ahead and run over to the chat and see what's going on over there. If you had to, okay, so we see here, Pratyus, when you're talking about buying on the margin. Now, one thing that I'm going to note here, when we say something like buying on the margin, the stock market crash, we need to think about like, okay, so buying on the margin, I would say that this is an example of a piece of evidence. Okay, so when we think about that, what would you use buying on the margin in order to support? Okay, so we're trying to think of some general arguments that we would put into a thesis statement, because we're probably not just going to say that buying on the margin is leading to the Great Depression. But yeah, definitely as far as what somebody said, buying stonks. Okay, so I think that was intentional there. So with that, nice one there. And so the stock market crash. Okay, we've got a lot of things here. Okay, so interesting, speculative buying, consumerism. Okay, so Carlin, consumerism definitely comes up on here. Okay, so with that, let's think about this. I'm going to go through some causes. Now, remember, you can really use anything that's historically defensible. Remember that the criteria is historical defensibility. All right. And so with that, I'm going to go through several causes. And of course, you are free to take whatever you want from this sheet, use it to study anything that would be helpful to you. Now, one of the things that I think is very important is that the Great Depression, there are some, short and long-term explanations here, but one of them is we have to think about that there has been this transition that's been going on ever since, early national America, that the 1920 census is the first census in the history of the United States that has more people living in urban areas, like people that live in towns of over 2,500 people than people who live in rural areas. Now, I know we've been going fast through here, but it's been a few decades since the Homestead Act and all of these kinds of things. But that the United States has been becoming increasingly urban. And so with that, we see that, overproduction of agricultural products. One of the things that we want to think about with the farm economy is as we get into this industrial revolution in the late 19th century, it makes agricultural production just increasingly efficient. Now, the problem is that you can't just tell a farmer like, okay, well, hey, we need less farmers now. So you 10 farmers over there, we actually need you to go go be middle managers at a corporation or something like that, you know? So the economy is changing very, very quickly, and it's taking some time to adjust. So some of this is a natural consequence of this adjustment from a farm economy to a to a more of a manufacturing and service-based economy. So for example, like today, I think that only about 2 to 3, I think only about 2% of Americans, if even a full 2%, are involved, like for a living, in growing food, okay, in farming. That basically, like, one person, now I'm not, don't quote me on this, but this is kind of close, you know, that one person who is growing food full time can feed, I think, around 50 people. Now I could be wrong on that. Okay. I'd be a little bit off, but that's still a lot. Okay. Where you think about, years before this, you needed someone, maybe one person for 10 people or so, that every 10th person had to be a farmer. And so the 1920s, were a decade of like, what is it that we're going to do about these farmers? Okay. And so what are we going to do in order to, in order to help them to adjust? Now, there was, during the 1920s, the McNary-Haugen Farm Relief Bill. Now, you probably won't remember this. I don't actually remember this. Okay. So with that, you could know that Coolidge, he vetoed a farm relief bill. Now, on one hand, it's like, why doesn't he want to provide relief to the farmers? But on the other hand, this is something where if the government decides that we're going to provide relief for this group of people, and we're basically going to give money to make the economy less efficient, like basically it was saying that the government would buy up excess grain, okay, so that there wasn't, this leftover supply. Well, on one hand, that gives short-term relief, but on the other hand, it doesn't encourage the economy to adjust. Okay, so everything you're going to be doing there, like when you think about Coolidge, Coolidge is, probably our last true, like, classical liberal president. Like, when I think about, like, a classical liberal in terms of really just wanting to let everything sort of be. Remember Coolidge, he says the business of government is business. And the economy as a whole is growing by leaps and bounds, but there is still this problem of the farm economy. And so with this, Coolidge, Hoover, and Roosevelt, they've all got different ways of dealing with this, okay? And so as far as that, Coolidge vetoed this farm relief bill, which would have let the government, purchase excess crops and stabilize prices. Now, Coolidge says the solution here is for the private sector to correct itself, okay, and produce less. Now, the thing is, making food more expensive is not the solution to the problem. It's like whether you do something or whether you do nothing, there's, it's just like when you take something for a headache, if you've got a headache because you're stressed out and you take a couple Advil, but you continue to engage in whatever it's been stressing you out, then that's going to be, that's really not going to help the root problem. Now, Hoover is kind of in the middle here, okay? So Hoover creates the Federal Farm Board, which then is purchasing excess grain, okay? So basically doing some things here to try to stabilize prices. But then again, it's not doing anything about the fundamental problem that the agricultural sector, is overloaded. There are too many producers. So Hoover believes the federal government has, a responsibility to, basically, for providing relief for the struggling agricultural sector, okay? Now, though not for individuals necessarily, okay? So as far as that goes, Roosevelt in the New Deal is going to go so far as to sign the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which is going to pay subsidies. This is one of his New Deal agencies. This is going to be paid for the subsidies for farmers who agree not to plant crops. Now, here's the thing. On one hand, Roosevelt, so FDR's Agricultural Adjustment Act, it provides relief for the farmers. If I'm a struggling farmer, it's like, okay, great, I've gotten relief. But here is, this money doesn't just come out of nowhere. This is tax money. And this tax money is then being paid to this farmer not to produce. And then, of course, when you think about, the effect of this is keeping crop prices stable. The price of food is being artificially kept high. The supply of food is being artificially kept, at a minimum when people need to eat. People need low prices. So here's the thing. It's just if you do something here, if you don't do anything, it's not helping the farmers. But if you do something, then it's not helping the economy as a whole. So you can see the position that any of these presidents, are in. I mean, it's just when it comes down to it, like when we think about the Great Depression, relief for the sake of relief is inherently wasteful. What I mean by that is when we think about the New Deal, for example, relief, recovery, reform. Now, the New Deal, FDR obviously, with the New Deal, obviously provided direct economic relief for people who were struggling and people who needed it. There were a lot of people that were thankful for the relief that they got from the Roosevelt administration. But then on the other hand, when we think about recovery, now it just straight up says in the course and exam description, okay, this is one of those things that, it just says in the course and exam description, the New Deal did not end the Great Depression. That basically FDR takes office in 1933. It's not until Europeans start killing each other in 1939 that we start to see, the demand caused by that European war is getting the U.S. economy to pick up. So with that, noting that, FDR is piddling around for years and it's not doing anything to help the economy recover. Now, at the same time, one other thing we have to think about, though, with the New Deal is that there is an argument to be made that some of these agencies, although they didn't bring an end to the Great Depression, that they've had a stabilizing influence on the economy since then. I mean, you look at, we've had a few, economic scares in my lifetime and your lifetime. We're just kind of coming out of one of them. But with that, we haven't seen anything to the magnitude of the Great Depression. So, for example, if you think about the FDIC, okay, so if we're thinking about the, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Now, if you walk into a bank and you don't see this logo, okay, you don't see an FDIC logo, then walk out of that bank. Don't put your money there. Or if you want to put your money there, do it, but I just wouldn't advise it, okay? You can do whatever you want, but I wouldn't advise you to put your money there, okay? Why not? Okay, because the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, this was a New Deal agency that is, basically the bank will choose to join the FDIC. And as a consequence of joining the FDIC, they pay their insurance and then they agree to abide by certain rules. And they can also be audited by federal auditors at any time. So the thing is, the bank joins the FDIC and agrees to these conditions. But on the other hand, the government, the federal government guarantees if an FDIC member bank goes under, then you're going to get your money. All depositors will get their money up to $250,000. And so that per institution, rather. So if you ever have, I haven't had that problem yet. Maybe Sean has, but I haven't had that problem yet where I've got, I've got 250,000 deposited here. I'd better go to another bank with my other 100,000 or something like that. But, that would be a good problem to have. So with that, though, that the FDIC, what it does is it solves the problem of bank runs. Okay, one of the things that was happening during Hoover's presidency is people would hear like, oh, did y'all hear such and such bank is failing? And then everybody runs on the bank, okay, that everybody's like, get my money out right now. Get my money out right now. And so with that, this is something that is causing a great deal of panic. And some banks are failing just because people are hearing, did you hear that bank is failing? And so the FDIC is something that provides a certain amount of stability. The SEC, now not the football conference or anything like that, but the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, okay, so the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is another New Deal agency where this is an independent regulatory agency that is basically in charge of regulating the stock market. Okay, so it was created following the crash, and it is supposed to enforce the law against market manipulation. So insider trading, you know, if somebody trades stock based on a tip that the public didn't have, that is no. And so this is the sort of thing also because of regulations on the stock market. If there's a certain, like if the stock market takes a certain plunge in a day, okay, that if a stock market takes a certain plunge in a day, then it will, you know, it'll close for the day. So there are regulations to try to keep things, you know, to keep things stable. And so, which is making me, I wonder how Microsoft stock, I wonder how Microsoft stock did today. Oh wow, yeah, Microsoft stock lost about 4% with that Bill Gates announcement. So the thing is, still a pretty expensive stock, but it went down about 4%. Evidently, Bill Gates is getting a divorce. Now, here's the thing with the stock market. Is the stock market, I mean, how much does Bill Gates divorce? Like, oh, actually, okay, 1.62. So it only went down 1.62. That's a lot in one day. Okay, so when we look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, yeah, it actually went up a little bit. Okay, so here's the thing about the stock market. The stock market is not real. You know, the stock market is speculation. So it's like, you know, this is a great example of, you know, what the stock market is. Okay, because it's like when it comes down to it, Bill Gates, who is retired, like, you know, should not, like, news of his divorce really should not be causing this stock price to, you know, shift like almost 2 points, but it does. I mean, the stock market is basically, it is not what Microsoft is actually worth. It's about the perception of what Microsoft is worth. So with that, I know I jumped ahead to the New Deal a little bit, and that's okay because we're reviewing, right? So as far as that goes, you know, with the 20s, now note here that the 1920s is we're getting more toward, now I wouldn't say they went all the way back to the Gilded Age, but more toward that idea that the government should support big business, okay? Where that's more of like a Gilded Age, you know, kind of philosophy. Now, the 1920s were a period of massive growth. Like, we have had few periods of economic growth like the 1920s, but they ended with a crash. Why? Okay, now one thing we're going to talk about is, like we were saying earlier, or I was saying, because, you know, y'all aren't here, y'all are in the chat, but maybe y'all are saying the same things. Now, the 1920s were a period of transition, and the farm economy struggled, which was still a major sector of the economy. And so with this, and this is what I've noted, I love using this particular statistic, that the 1920 census was the first one that showed more Americans living in urban areas, okay? And then two, excessive borrowing due to consumerism and cheap credit policies from the Federal Reserve. Now, this is something that is, you know, basically the Federal Reserve is the governing agency that was created during the, you know, during the Progressive era in order to regulate interest rates and in order to regulate the money supply. Now, one thing that you'll see now, which is just really, really fascinating. Now, I'm not a degreed economist, so you know, I'm not like an expert. I'm just a guy that that teaches. But at the same time, we're hearing about inflationary scares. We're seeing prices go up. You know, prices are going up, but interest rates are very, very low, because our interest rates are not regulated by the market. They're regulated by a board of experts at the Federal Reserve. This is a very progressive kind of mentality here. But at the same time, like, you know, when you have low interest rates, which the 1920s had super low interest rates, okay? So the thing is right now, like, that we've got this house, I mean, it's just housing has just gone through the roof. No pun intended, no pun intended. But housing prices are just going up and up and up, but interest rates are like very low. And it's like, well, if the market were determining interest rates, where would they be right now? But at the same time, you know, basically in the 1920s, for the most part, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates very low. And when interest rates are low, people borrow money. This is why, you know, housing prices seem to be going up, because people are like, oh, I've got to buy a house now while the interest rate is low. And it's like, why are you paying 10% more for a house just because of the interest rates? But low interest rates, they encourage borrowing. Like the lower the interest rates, let me just get my AC real quick. That the lower the interest rates, okay, the lower the interest rates, the more people want to borrow. So note that there was already this like consumerism kind of spirit. And one thing that I was reading about recently, one of the things about consumerism is that, you know, the propaganda campaigns from World War I, those people who did the propaganda campaigns, and they were so, you know, they were so effective that after the war's over, they go into advertising. You know, and so basically advertising, you know, what went into war propaganda in, you know, 1917, 1918 is now all of a sudden in the advertising industry. And they're saying, look, just put a little bit down and you can pay for it later. And so with this, you know, this is one of those things that at the very end, it just all of a sudden, phew, all the stock, you know, everything goes up. So consumerism, sure, you know, that's something that is being driven by advertising, but also being driven by cheap credit policies. Now, if you're talking about buying on the margin, so let me show you how how you craft an argument, you know, for your DVQ. So basically buying stocks on the margin with borrowed money, okay? This is something that, you know, people are doing, okay? So they're doing this, and this is part of what happens. It's part of what leads to a financial collapse, okay? So if I were making an argument, I would say that part of what's bringing this about is the financial collapse of the stock market and the banks. And so with that, I would use evidence. I would use specific evidence such as buying stocks on the margin. Okay, I wouldn't argue that the Great Depression happened because people bought stocks on the margin. I would note that financial institutions, you know, that we have the overall collapse of the financial sector. And then you would get into the stock market crash. And then part of the reason for the stock market crash is people who, you know, it's just these people who are like, oh, Bill Gates is getting a divorce. I'd better, you know, sell Microsoft stock. I mean, that is, you know, just asinine. Okay. I mean, it's just one of those things that, you know, why is, you know, why all of a sudden, let's see. So if we look at it for, you know, which I guess it went up for a little, you know, went up for a little bit. And, you know, and that's the other thing, like, you know, if you go back, you know, you look at the effect, like, you know, that we had in March, that all of a sudden, bam, there it is. Okay. So we see here where it was 185 and all of a sudden, you know, I mean, that people were scared, like people panic, and then it goes way down. Now it looks like Microsoft recovered, you know, in short order, you know, and by the time we got to, you know, we got to August or so, that, you know, it was up beyond where it had been. So with that, but if you bought there in a panic, in let's see, March of 2020, 137, and then you could have, you know, you've made all, I mean, you got a big return on your investment there. And so as far as that goes, though, when people are casually speculating in the stock market, and especially when people go in there and they, you know, say, hey, I'm going to pay 10% of my money, I'm going to borrow the rest from the bank. You know, if we look at the stock market, 1920s graph. Okay, so let's look at stock market in the 1920s. And this is one of those things that people are like, look, I can't lose. Okay, like, it, you know, take out this stuff here. Okay, take out that stuff there. But as far as that, you know, going up to 1929, okay, so going up to 1929, we see that it's just going up and up and up and up and up. And then all of a sudden, bam, okay, it goes down, all right? And then it comes back up a little bit. And this is something we're going to get to in a second too. Like, did this have to keep going down and down and down, or was this exacerbated? Okay, and so again, all of these, this is an argumentative question. Okay, so that's the beauty of this. Overproduction. Okay, that basically, you know, it's like factories are trying to keep pace with consumerism, and then all of a sudden, in the late 1920s, the consumerism starts slowing down. People have all these goods. The Federal Reserve, you know, puts the interest rates up a little bit, and then we see here that the agricultural sector is also overproducing. All right. So far we've been looking at things in the United States, but another thing that we have to consider is that there is some serious economic fallout from the First World War. So, for example, I was talking about yesterday. Well, actually, I think it was in my 8 o'clock. Remember, I'm going to be on my channel at 8 p.m. Eastern. And so, with this, economic fallout from the First World War, I was talking about the Dawes Plan. That, remember, after World War I, Britain and France are like, hey, we need reparations from Germany. And Germany's like, whoa, we just fought a war too. And, in the mid 1920s, it's like Germany can't pay their reparations. France sends in troops to occupy the Ruhr region of Germany. And the United States is like, whoa. Okay, we're going to come in, we're going to hand some money out, and we're going to make this problem go away. Okay, so really, part of the issue is that, the United States, is having a booming economy in the 1920s, but other countries really aren't. And so when the United States collapses, the United States has been propping up Europe, and that's going to create a problem when all of a sudden the United States collapses. Europe no longer has anybody to prop it up. And, that's going to lead to the Great Depression being exacerbated. In 1919, John Maynard Keynes, who actually, was kind of popular with the Roosevelt administration, he wrote a book, The Economic Consequences of the Peace, in which he argued, he said, look, that there's going to be an economic fallout from what we see here with the Versailles Treaty, that this is not good economics. Okay, so that's going to be something we're going to see there. And so with that, we can see that, this is where we get into, did the economic crisis in the late 1920s necessarily have to result in a depression? And so when we think about economics, is the study of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Okay, so basically, if the government wants to help the economy, you pass legislation that encourages the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. If you want to hurt the economy, then you pass legislation that inhibits the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. So Herbert Hoover, it's like some people like to blame Coolidge for the Depression, but if Coolidge would have been president, Coolidge probably would have kept cool. That was kind of his way. And so, but what Hoover does is he's like, how about a tax increase? Because we need to make sure that the budget is balanced. So let's do a tax increase. Good idea or bad idea? The economy's going poorly, so let's increase taxes, which this is something that inhibits the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. A tax increase was not the best idea here. Now, then not only increasing taxes, but increasing the tariff. Okay, this is the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which is the second highest tariff in the history of the United States. Okay, and so with that, the intent of the Hawley-Smoot tariff is to protect American jobs. Okay, it is to protect American jobs, and so with that, this is something that it's there to protect American jobs. Now, here's the problem with politicians making, economic decisions, because the economy, when the economy is in trouble, then the economy says, okay, we need policies that encourage the production, distribution, consumption of goods and services. We need something that is going to help GDP, our gross domestic product. Now, here's the thing. Voters don't want to hear that the gross domestic product. I mean, I would say most voters don't even know what GDP is. Okay. I mean, that's just a fact. All right. That most voters don't even know what GDP is. So politicians, they're not thinking about GDP. They're thinking we need to protect jobs, because when politicians talk, jobs, it's all about unemployment. How many people are working? How many people have a job? And the thing is, if you look at that, people having jobs is a symptom of a good economy. When the GDP is high, people are going to have jobs. But politicians, they're like, we got to protect jobs. And so Hoover and people who supported the Hawley-Smoot tariff, they're saying we've got to make sure that foreign goods aren't coming in. We need to protect American jobs. And it doesn't help things. Okay, this is something that over 1,000 economists, signed a circular letter. They were like, President Hoover, please do not sign this, But Herbert Hoover, he signed this, okay? I mean, that's the thing. He did what he, was advised by economists not to do, and it didn't help the situation. So here's the thing that I think, some people say, oh, Herbert Hoover didn't do anything. Herbert Hoover actually did anything. He did a lot of things, but he didn't do the right things, okay? That this is the thing, like, this is what they call in economics, and I guess even in life, the law of unintended consequences. And so somebody should be able to see this a mile away. I said earlier, I'm not, a degreed economist, but I can tell that some of this stuff is just not great. And then he gets business leaders together and some of the biggest corporate leaders, and he's like, hey, I'm not going to pass legislation or anything, but could we kind of informally agree to keep wages where they are? Now, here's the thing. The economy is suffering. Wages want to go down, okay? Wages want to go down when the economy is suffering. And so the thing is that by saying, let's have a voluntary wage freeze, this is something that Hoover is advocating freezing wages, but at the same time, Hoover is advocating, he's not making it possible for people to keep their jobs because he wants wages to go up. So with that, let's see. I'm not able to get this thing. Let's see. So as far as this goes, let's see. So with that. All right. So as far as maybe how what Hoover should have done here, okay? Now Hoover, he could have given the economy a chance to recover. Like let's see if it, what it'll do on its own. And so with that, then support legislation, possibly by providing temporary relief, okay, for the unemployed. Now, here's something he could have done from an economic sense, but then also from a political and humanitarian sense, providing some kind of relief for the unemployed, because he needs that from, a humanitarian and a political perspective. So we want to note that there were things Hoover did. He had a couple of projects that he, that he put out there, but Hoover drew the line at direct relief. Okay, that's the thing about Hoover, is he drew the line at direct relief. That Hoover said this is not what government is supposed to do. It's outside the scope of government. Which this is something I don't know if this is in the in the things that we've got for this for this one. Let me see if this was. Okay, that this is actually one of my favorite resources at the Bill of Rights Institute, the Texas Seed Bill. Okay, so the Bill of Rights Institute, they've got Grover Cleveland's veto of the Texas Seed Bill. Now, in 1887, Texas had like, an agricultural crisis. And what happens here is that, that basically Congress passes some relief for Texas. And, we want to help that. Okay. So as far as that goes, that, Grover Cleveland in the Gilded Age, who, believed in a more limited role for government, that basically he says here that, government is not your parent, okay? Government is not what comes in just to help people, when there's some kind of problem. People need to do that. Society needs to do that. So that is the mindset that Hoover is still in. As far as that goes, support BRI. Yeah. So basically what he says here is Grover Cleveland says when he vetoes the Texas Seed Bill, and it was just like, hey, let's send some money to Texas so that they can buy seed. But Grover Cleveland, who was like a veto king, he said, I can find no warrant for such an appropriation in the Constitution. Okay, so he's like, look, my job as president is to enforce the Constitution. And I do not believe that the power and duty of the general government ought to be extended to the relief of individual suffering, which is in no manner properly related to the public service or benefit. A prevalent tendency to disregard this limited mission of this power, the limited mission of this power and duty should, I think, be steadfastly resisted, to the end that the lesson should be constantly enforced that, though the people support the government should not support the people. Now, as far as this goes, he says here that when it comes down to that, that's not the federal government's job. And one of the biggest things that we see as a result of the Great Depression is that in the minds of many Americans, like, this is something that government should be doing, okay? That basically people are suffering and they're looking to government to give them, some relief, okay? But Hoover is, a little bit closer to how Cleveland is looking at this during the Gilded Age. Now, Roosevelt's going to have a different, kind of view of this. So when we look at Hoover and FDR, now, both created new federal agencies designed to deal with the problem of the Great Depression. None of these federal agencies were particularly helpful in bringing about economic recovery. Okay, I mean, that's just a fact. Okay, but then again, Hoover saw direct relief as outside the legitimate scope of government, while FDR believed that the federal government should be responsible for direct relief for people who were suffering. And so when we've looked, at the coronavirus pandemic, this was something that, both parties, they may have disagreed sometimes about the amount of relief, but both parties, both parties were involved, they supported direct relief for people who were suffering during the coronavirus pandemic, and even for people who weren't. I received, I think, every check that went out, but I didn't lose my job or anything like that. And of course, that's the other side of it. When it's like, okay, we want government to assist people who are suffering, and government says we're passing legislation to do that. And then people who are suffering and people who aren't suffering both get help. And so with that, that's just something that we're going to see, coming from that. But when you're looking, at this, you're looking at causation, like if you had something on the LEQ, evaluate the extent to which speculation in the stock market led the United States into the Great Depression from the period from 1920 to 1933. Now, the extent to which speculation in the stock market. Now, one thing that I'll note here, the stock market, okay, small or great extent, and then finding another cause. And then I'll find something like this, okay, but I'm going to say, look, the stock market speculation, it was something that was a problem, okay? So basically, then Hoover's policies, I could say, are another problem. So although stock market speculation contributed to the Great Depression because many people were ruined by the stock market crash, Herbert Hoover's policies had an even more disastrous effect because all of his solutions made the economy worse. Okay. So as far as that goes, this is something that, we could see that now actually I'm going to say here, not speculation, the stock market, but the stock market crash. Okay. So as far as that goes, thinking about how I'm going to frame this. Okay. So with, as far as this goes, now I would make this a little bit more, I think I made this kind of off the cuff. His solutions, when we think about this, contributed, okay, so contributed to further economic, stagnation. Okay. So as far as that, and I don't know if y'all use a word like stagnation, I don't know, but basically further economic, how about this, further economic collapse. Okay. So with that, so the crash of the, so basically as far as that goes, we're looking at that. Now, again, any of these explanations for the Great Depression, has people who are arguing these things. So, when you have a question like that, these are always argumentative questions. Now, let's go ahead and go to the, go to the chat and that sort of thing.
Well, Tom, there's been quite a spirited economic and public policy debate, but so we're trying to find just the questions. Some people had a couple questions about was the New Deal a factor as far as the Great Depression continuing for years after? And then maybe if you speak a little bit about what groups were opposed to New Deal policies and why.
Okay, great. And it's great that we've got, because this is where I think history becomes most relevant to us when we start thinking in terms of and also a very civil discourse as well. This is great, okay, where we're looking at, people who are actually having a good, a good thing here, as far as just a very civil debate. And so with that, when it comes down to it, you always have to think about that when people talk about morality, for example, that when it comes down to it, what is the moral thing to do? Is the moral thing to do what's going to help the economy as a whole, or what's going to help people right now, maybe at the expense of the economy rebounding? So that's the thing. As far as some of the New Deal policies, like, again, when we think about relief, recovery, reform, the New Deal was extremely effective at relief, and I would say pretty effective at providing some necessary reforms. Now, again, recovery, because a lot of these New Deal programs were designed to help people who were suffering, not to give the economy some, some breathing space. I mean, when it comes down to it, as far as what is going to contribute to economic recovery. Now, let's talk about, like, as far as, what you were asking me, Sean, from the chat, is who opposed New Deal policies. Now, this is something where, on one hand, FDR is opposed by, business, some business leaders, but people tend to be more conservative. And so people who are conservative are like, this is socialism, okay? This is a Trojan horse for socialism. Now, then the people who were like the real socialists, they're like, this isn't going far enough. Okay, this is basically, this is just child's play compared to what we need. People like Huey P. Long, from Louisiana, said that we just need to go in. He called this program Share Our Wealth. Like, he basically said we need to raid the fortunes of the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and all of these folks, and the Morgans. And the thing about Huey P. Long, he was a populist, a small p populist. And the thing about populism, now not capital P with the 1890s Farmers Party, but populists, they tend to come up with solutions that sound good, and they sound good, they're very simple, but once you do the math and once you analyze it, they're not so effective. I mean, you could take all of, Rockefellers and Carnegie's and Morgan's fortunes, and it's not going to be able to really give people enough money to, like, live on for very long. So that's the thing. Like, FDR was criticized from the right and the left. Now, also, we'll note the Supreme Court was not very friendly to FDR's policies. Schechter versus the United States, for example. This was where a kosher butchery, sued because New Deal regulators were coming in and trying to tell them how to run their local business. And the Supreme Court, sided with the Schechters and said that, this is, that this went beyond the Commerce Clause, that the government does not have the authority to intervene and meddle in local businesses and how they operate. Now, as far as that goes, somebody was asking about a comparison to the Great Society. I think that is something that that we could note here, that when we're thinking about FDR's New Deal, okay, New Deal versus Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Okay, so when we think about this, that we'll note now, when I do this, if we were looking at an SAQ, I think this was an SAQ a couple years ago, but it could also be like an LEQ. When we think about the New Deal and the Great Society, and we think about, like, similarities and differences. Okay, so when we're thinking about this, one thing that I would note here is, of course, the New Deal is in the 1930s. Okay, so the 1930s, the Great Society is in the 1960s. Okay, so we would note here that these are both, so both expansions. Okay, so expansions of government, in order to help the poor. Okay, both of them were opposed by conservatives. Okay, so conservatives, who referred to the programs as socialist. Okay, so we see that. Now, the Great Society, one thing that I would note, of course, this is Medicare and Medicaid, whereas the New Deal, we think specifically Social Security, okay? Now, as far as that goes as well, is most New Deal programs, okay, programs required some work to be done, okay, so to be done in return for the relief, okay? One of those things, if we think like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, okay? So the Civilian Conservation Corps, when we're looking at this is basically like, you know, they would take young men, you know, and they would, you know, high school, college age, you know, people, and they would bring them and they'd go out and they would live in camps and they would, you know, construct, like they would go on construction projects for state and national parks. And so what we see here, and what would happen is these young men, they would work and then, you know, they live in these camps together, and the, you know, and the money, like basically 20% of the money would be given to these boys, and then 80% of the money would be sent back to their families, okay? Most of these things, when we think about like relief programs, you know, so relief programs did not, you know, relief programs did not, you know, require, you know, any, you know, work to be contributed in order to receive them, okay? Now, another thing I would note here is that the Great Society built on a foundation of the New Deal, okay? So basically, while the New Deal, you know, really, you know, set a foundation, okay? So it laid a foundation, you know, laid a foundation for a more expansive role, okay? So expansive role for government in addressing, you know, poverty, okay? Now, another thing we could note here is, you know, did these things, you know, did these programs, you know, did these programs necessarily, you know, eliminate the problems that they were, you know, that they were created to, you know, they were created to solve, okay? So, you know, I would note here, did not eliminate the problems they were created to solve. Now, note here, this would be, and all of this stuff is, this would be argumentative, okay? This would be something be argumentative, but I could defend this argument. You know, I could say that, you know, the New Deal did not solve the Great Depression. Like, it did not bring the Depression to an end. Now, also the Great Society, like Lyndon Johnson said, look, we're going to bring these programs out here, and this was a war on poverty, okay? So he said this is a war on poverty. Basically, these programs are going to help get rid of it. And so with that, I think that we're, you know, we're going to see in terms of, you know, in terms of that, you know, are these. Now, another thing that we'll note here is that it provided economic relief, okay, so for, you know, for minorities, but, you know, without civil rights, you know, without civil rights provisions, okay, so basically without civil rights legislation, you know, so economic relief for minorities, I would say actually here, you know, so, but without, you know, civil rights legislation, okay? And then the Great Society, meanwhile, this had, you know, you've got the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968, the Voting Rights Act, okay, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, okay. So these are some things here that, you know, while the New Deal, you know, did provide economic relief for minorities, one thing that we might note here is, you know, basically 50% Black unemployment, okay. So unemployment during the Depression, like overall unemployment got up to about 25%, but Black unemployment got to about 50%. So, you know, FDR was providing economic relief for people that, you know, for a community that really, really needed relief. And so, you know, this is something to, you know, something that you can get into here, but going into the similarities and the differences, remember that it was Harry Truman that started, you know, basically with his 1948 executive order integrating the military. That is, you know, that is something that really is starting this whole, you know, as far as a president being actively involved involved in the pursuit of racial equality and civil rights. So with that, FDR kind of, he knew what he could do without losing political capital. Whereas Truman was really just kind of motivated by whatever he thought was right. This same guy that, dropped the bomb. He's just like, okay, I mean, he decides the right thing to do. He did it. Now, not everybody agrees with him, but that's what he thought about it. Now, with that, let's see here. I'd like to go into like the lead up to World War II. And I may or may not have been sharing my screen there, but y'all have got access to this Google document. So this is in case I wasn't sharing my screen. I forget, it's been a long week and it's not even over. Is it even halfway over? But basically FDR's New Deal versus Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. If I were doing like an SAQ or an LEQ or something like that, that these are some things that I would focus on here. So going from there, as far as that goes, we see here that, I think that my next logical stop would be to get into the lead into to World War II. But let's see what we've got here. So little bit about the executive orders. Now, one thing I would say here, executive order 8802. Okay, that's something that I think if you want to know about like an executive order from FDR. Now, if you're a couple numbers off, no big deal. But this was during the war. FDR issued Executive Order 8802, which prohibited ethnic or racial discrimination in the defense industry. Okay, so this is something that basically it was the first equal opportunity employment directive. That it was the first thing that we see here, that it's prohibiting employment discrimination. Now, note here, even though we tend to associate this, with civil rights and stuff, the immediate cause here is that Americans of Italian and German ethnicity were being, basically they were not being hired, at some of these contractors, and that was causing a problem. And so with this, that was what, one of his primary motivations was that these Italian Americans and German Americans, they're unable to get jobs. But then again, he did issue a blanket prohibition on anybody that's getting federal money for defense contracting is not going to, they're going to have to provide equal opportunity. They can't discriminate based on race or ethnicity or anything like that. So with that, that's something that, you could say that, FDR is kind of opening the door a bit for as far as civil rights legislation that'll come after. And so with that, one thing we want to note too, though, is what's going on in the world in the 1930s. Okay, so when we're looking at this, everything is, it's just Europe is, just in a mess here. Okay, and so what's happening right there? Okay, so the United States is, is basically in a situation where we're neutral. The world is falling apart, but so what? Okay, the thing is, now this is where I was talking yesterday about how Washington's farewell address can contextualize so many foreign policies much later. Now, I was actually tutoring a client today. I want to tell y'all about this because this is something I thought about. When thinking about contextualization, you want to think about something I called like basically the proximity relevance matrix. Okay, so if you think about this like a dual axis, now normally something like Washington's farewell address was over 100 years before this. It's way away, it's not very nearby, but at the same time it's extremely relevant. So usually for your contextualization, you want to pick something that is close to the material, but if it's extremely relevant, it can come from farther away. But if you're going to bring something in from farther away, it needs to be extremely relevant. Now, note that while the United States, while Europe's going to war, the United States is adopting an attitude that some call isolationism, or others would call non-intervention or neutrality. And so Congress, there was something called the Nye Report, where Congress came to the conclusion that, that basically what got us into World War I? Well, what got us into World War I? Well, arms manufacturers basically, coaxed us into World War I so they'd make money. So Congress passes laws, the Neutrality Acts, which are banning the sale of arms to belligerents. Now, that's when FDR responds with the arsenal of democracy, cash and carry, destroyers for bases, and lend-lease. It's going to be time to wrap up in just a bit. So with that, just understand that, of course, there's another really interesting debate that's going on that still continues, but continued especially then. Was FDR trying to get us into the war, or was FDR trying to, trying to keep us out of the war by helping the British? Okay, like basically helping the British and keeping us out of the war by doing so. And so basically escalating this over the years. So 1939, cash and carry. We'll sell you arms as long as you can pay cash and carry it home yourself. Technically, Germany could have taken advantage of this, but only one nation really had the Navy to be able to do this, and that was Britain. So we're kind of giving a nod to Britain, but like, hey, Germany, y'all could technically do this. And then there is destroyers for bases. Now, we are going to give Britain some destroyers, let them use our destroyers in return for Britain letting us use some naval bases in the Caribbean that we don't really need. Now, destroyers, what do? They're submarine killers, okay? So basically you do the math there. That's like we're giving them submarine killers when their enemy likes to use submarines, okay? The German U-boats. And then finally, lend-lease, where we're basically letting the British and the Soviets, actually, I didn't know about this till recently, but I actually stumbled upon something. We were actually letting the Soviets use military equipment as well to fight Hitler. But it was mostly for the British in 1941. We're just like, you can borrow it. FDR was like, look, if your neighbor comes over and asks to use the garden hose, you don't tell him that'll be $15. You just give him your garden hose. Tell him to bring it back when he's done. And so FDR, is just making this casual explanation there. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully y'all got something out of this. It looks like the chat was definitely very, very lively. Okay, so with that, this is something as far as that goes. So with that, let's go ahead and, Sean, you can take it away. And then tomorrow we're going to be focusing on contemporary Europe. Y'all be sure to show up with your questions quick. Let me know what y'all want to focus on, because there's, of course, a lot of stuff we can get into. But thank y'all for coming. And Sean will give us a proper send-off.
Well, great job, Tom. Hey, listen, yeah, you mentioned the chat there. Boy, if that's any indication, what I saw there about how well these students think and how well they're going to do on the test, I'm very encouraged by listening to all the intelligent comments there, or reading them, not listening. But anyway, thank you so much for joining Tom, Richey, and the Bill of Rights Institute and me this evening. Remember that the Bill of Rights Institute website is the place where you can find all these primary sources, lesson plans, all kinds of opportunities, and so much more for you. Join us again tomorrow, like Tom said, when we will continue for the final segment, and the topic will be post-war and contemporary America. So on behalf of the Bill of Rights Institute and Tom Richey, I'm going to say have a great evening. Enjoy the rest of your Star Wars day. Goodbye.